Good evening, and thank you for joining us for our celebration of Nona Faustine's monographic book, White Shoes. My name is Eugenie Tsai. I'm the John and Barbara Vogelstein Senior Curator of Contemporary Art here at the Brooklyn Museum. Before we delve into tonight's program, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge that we are currently located on land that is part of the unceded ancestral homeland of the Lenape Delaware Nations. We recognize and honor the Lenape Delaware Nations, their elders, and all future generations. I would also like to pay tribute to the enslaved people who built the foundation of our country. At the museum, we are committed to addressing systemic racism and the ongoing legacies of settler colonialism in our collective work. I'll be joined on stage by American Sign Language interpreters Kyle Nye and Gloria Vargas. There are seats reserved in the front rows for anyone who would like a direct view of the ASL interpreters, and those are marked with a white sheet of paper. Tonight's program will open with a poem by Pamela Sneed. Then Nona Faustine will present an overview of her new book, White Shoes, which was published in December by MAC, who have been integral collaborators on this evening's programming. White Shoes is a collection of self-portraits taken in locations around New York that were sites of slave auctions, burial grounds, slave-owning farms, and the coastal locations where slave ships docked, very much sounding like the financial district in Lower Manhattan where I live. Through her photograph, Faustine confronts the city's once significant and now largely obscured and unacknowledged involvement in the slave trade, and expresses solidarity with the people whose names and memories have been lost but are embedded in the land. Afterward, Faustine will be joined on stage by the book contributors Pamela Sneed, Jessica Lanay, and Seph Rodney for a discussion of the book and its making. Let me take a moment right now to introduce you to them. Nona Faustine is a native New Yorker and award-winning photographer. Her work focuses on history, identity, representation, and proposes a deeper examination of contemporary racial and gender stereotypes. Her work is in the collection of the David C. Driscoll Center at the Maryland State University, the Studio Museum of Harlem, the Carnegie Museum, and of course, the Brooklyn Museum. In 2017, Nona gave a walkthrough of Ruins and Rituals, a groundbreaking exhibition of Beverly Buchanan sculptures that was here on view at the Elizabeth A. Sackler Center for Feminist Art. Her observations about the monuments made a huge impression on me. We later acquired 3 of Nona's photographs from the White Shoe series that were shot at the nearby Lefferts House. Some of you may have seen them in the exhibition, The Slipstream, Reflection, Resilience, and Resistance in the Art of Our Time, where they were on view for 6 months. But if you missed them, this is all the more reason to purchase the book, White Shoes, because they are reproduced in that volume. Jessica Lanay is an interdisciplinary writer, poet, and art journalist raised in Key West, Florida. Her debut hybrid collection, Amphibian, won the 2020 Naomi Long Madgett Poetry Prize, judged by Toi Derricotte from Broadside Lotus Press. She has performed her poetry at the Brooklyn Museum, the Cave Canem and Bowery Presents First Book Series, and with Brooklyn Poets. Seph Rodney, PhD, was born in Jamaica and came of age in the Bronx, New York. He's a senior critic and the opinions editor for Hyperallergic. He can be heard weekly on the podcast, The American Age. His book, The Personalization of Museum Visit, was published by Routledge in May of 2019. In 2020, he won the Rabkin Arts Journalism Prize. Pamela Sneed is a New York-based poet, performer, and visual artist. She's the author of Funeral Diva, published by City Lights in October 2020, featured in the New York Times and the Publishers Weekly. Funeral Diva won the 2021 Lambda Lesbian Poetry Award. She currently has work on view at the Leslie Lohman Museum and has won the 2021 Black Queer Art Mentorship Award for her leadership and literary talent. Now please join me in welcoming to this stage Pamela Sneed, who will kick off our evening. Thank you.
All right. Good evening. Power to the people, all the time. All right. So I want to start off, and I want to say, just to mention, a big loss that we've had recently, and that's Bell Hooks. And I want to mention Greg Tate and Andre Leontali. So I just speak their name tonight. And I want to say I'm so proud of Nona Faustine as a friend and as an artist. Her work is so important, and I'm reading a new poem. Sometimes I contemplate that the irony of that much of South Africa's economy now is built on a man, person, movement, human beings that the government and police once tried to kill. That hundreds of thousands of people of every color prior to COVID for years flocked to Robben Island in South Africa to tour Mandela's former cell. There's still a blanket and a basin with barely room to breathe. Others too were held on Robben Island, anti-apartheid leaders who were broken and went mad there. It's remarkable amidst these circumstances, Mandela's spirit still rose. Anyone who listens, I'll tell in his own words that what sustained him through 27 years of imprisonment was a poem. It's interesting now, part of the country's economy relies on him. I read on the internet that his net worth when he died was only about $3 million. Touring, I also visited a small house in Cape Town where he lived with Winnie and the girls. Their kitchen had a bulletproof wall. I can't imagine what it was like to live like that. The fear that you or your children might be killed at any moment. Can't tell you how meaningful it is to also visit the Apartheid Museum in Johannesburg, where some of the actual artillery used in fighting apartheid is displayed. You understand that the war for freedom was long and bloody. The last room is devoted to gay activists, something not even America has done or accomplished. There's also the women's jail on Constitution Hill, a monument to women who fought alongside men against apartheid. A South African lesbian activist asked me cynically, as an American, if I feel at home in South Africa, like a lost daughter returned. Carefully, because I've already been to Ghana and toured the jails used in slavery, I know the issues with Americans claiming an African homeland. Instead, I say my activism started here. In that way, I feel home. I can't imagine my life as a poet and activist if I had never seen Nelson and Winnie Mandela's fists raised in triumph at every sighting during that long, 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 brutal war. If I hadn't seen Bishop Desmond Tutu unflinching in the eyes of a ghastly regime, I could never be who I am today. I would not have the courage. Today, on New Year's Day, I am weepy with grief of so many things lost. I struggle until I see that picture of Archbishop Desmond Tutu, recently deceased, his hands thrust in the air, dancing with spirit. I remember myself, that invictus spirit that lives on. I say, bring on 2022. I'm ready. Welcome, Nona Faustine.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming out tonight. I would like to thank the Brooklyn Museum for this evening, and I would like to thank Mac Books for publishing my work. Tonight, I would like to dedicate this evening to my mother, Queen Elizabeth Simmons, and yes. And my daughter, Queen Mings. And my sisters, Shannon and Anita, AKA the Duchess. And last but not least, my father, Maclean Simmons, whose family albums that he created seared themselves into my soul and my heart. And I think it was destined that I'd be a photographer after that. Okay. So, the White Shoes series was inspired by two enslaved women from the 19th century, Sarah Bartman, here, AKA Venus Hottentot, in Europe, who was put on display against her will, and let me see if it goes. Delia Taylor on a plantation in South Carolina, whose daguerreotype was taken without her consent. The self-portrait series documents sites in the 200-plus years of slavery in New York City, where enslaved and free African Americans, along with First Nation Lenape Indians, lived, died, worked, or buried, along with First Nation Indians. Anyway, so going on. Excuse me. There's one image that I wanted to talk about before we have the discussion, and it gives you a little bit of insight and process. At dinner with Pamela, Justine, Kim, and Patricia the night before, we spoke about my photo shoot the next morning. I would be photographing at 3 locations in Lower Manhattan and some of the last sites in the series. The second site is a really important one. The enslaved rose up and fought for their freedom. I don't know what to do for it. I'm kind of stuck. I don't have a plan. What do you think I should do? I said. Justine thought I should give a middle finger to the camera. I'm going to wear one of my hats. A couple more suggestions were thrown out, but none really landed for the situation, I thought. The middle finger for the camera, though. It's out of character for the series. And talking to Shannon, she said, absolutely not. No. Look at what you've been saying and doing for the whole series. This deserved a serious, thoughtful response. So I thought I'll just bring everything I think I could need. Bring the hat that grounds me in the present, bring the musket, the past, bring the peasant shirt, cut up the back. I'll be wearing the new one, but I can try both and see what works. The day was Sunday, 4th of July, 8 a.m., perfect. This was the second site that morning. First site, Thomas Downing Oyster's house in the heart of Wall Street. Went well. The only hiccup was waiting for a tour group to walk through it. Few nosies. Afterward, we spent a few moments figuring out which direction to walk. The streets are a maze from the old city. We found ourselves at William Street and Maiden Lane, the site of the slave rebellion of 1712, marked by this huge fortress-like building that have its own 4 blocks. It reminds me of similar buildings in Florence, Italy. That's so interesting, I thought. I remember driving through here in a cab recently, I recalled. I hadn't done my usual surveillance of the surrounding architecture and landmarks before I arrived. But what are all these cop cars doing here? Maybe they're parked here for the holiday. Just be mindful. We better hurry up. The city's waking up and cars will be trouncing all through here before you know it. I set up the camera on the tripod in the middle of William Street in the direction of Wall Street. I compose a shot. Shannon steps into the frame. I take a few pics of her. We pause for the occasional passing car. Moving the tripod out of the way, it's not the best light. Horizontal or vertical frame. Ugh, I hate this part. I struggle to compose a shot in the overwhelming emotional situation. Aware of time, calm down, I tell myself. Stay calm now. Don't rush it. I hit the shutter a few times. Okay, let's try this. Wait, who are these dudes coming? Shannon begins to give them dagger eyes. Okay, why are they hanging around? They turn down Maiden Lane, slowing up, waiting to get a shot of me. They knew who I am, Shan. They better keep the F on. You're not gonna pick on her today. Well, I have all my clothes on today. Sorry, nothing here to see. Okay, Shan, I'm gonna get in the frame. Come behind the camera. Just wait, Nona, just wait. They're still hanging around. My mind is racing. I don't have anything. Okay, they're gone. I put on a hat, grab the musket. I signal for her to hit the shutter. A series of clicks as I strike a series of poses. Okay, that's good. Let me see. We move over to the side. I look at the playback. There's nothing here I like. It looks forced. The hat is throwing so much shade on my face. I didn't bring the reflector. I don't like the way I look in that shirt. It looks too new and all round. I look frumpy. There's no drama. Don't panic. Keep going. I thought. It takes a bit to get in the groove of things, for the good accidents, slight movements, a tilt of the head, a specific look, the way the sky brightened, a pose that makes a shot. You have time. Keep working it. The magic will come. Let's turn the camera around toward the Brooklyn Bridge. The sun is rising, the tall building, sliver of sky, and the cop's car in the background. Real New York City. Open the frame wide. You can see the street signs in the frame. That's better. It marks the spot. Let's try it again. I step into the middle of the intersection. Hit it, Shan. A series of clicks for a series of poses. I check it. I'm not feeling it. It's almost there. Just needs something else. You know what? I'm going to change into the other shirt. Where do I do that? Looking around. There's a spot in the doorway of this humongous fortress. I push the shopping cart over with all my stuff. With my back to the street, I take off the bra and the shirt. There's a camera in the corner of the doorway. Oh well, block it out. I got work to do. I put on the shirt that I wore for most of the series. It's cut down the middle. This time, I turn it to the front instead of the back. Oh shit. It doesn't come together enough for me to hold it tight with my hands. My boobs are too big. So how do? I set up this camera with all of this going on. Lord, you know what? Just take it off. Simplify it, I said. I was done with the nudes, and exception can be made. Improvise, think. Amazon, Dahomey female warriors. All these things rushed into my mind at once. The city was coming alive, a dog walker, a couple getting out of lifts, more cars coming through the site. Wrap this sarong around your chest, step into the frame, battle ready. I step out of the doorway. Okay, we're going to have to do this quick. I drag the tripod in the spot, frame the shot. I step into the middle of the intersection one final time. I take off the sarong, throw it to Shannon. This tunnel vision happens. I turn off one set of my senses and I focus on the camera. My hearing intensifies. I'm looking at the viewer. Suddenly, I hear someone or something coming at me into the frame on a motorized bicycle. Will they touch me? Don't look at them. I raise my arm with the musket. I hear a man say, "What the fuck?" Get him! I yelled to Shannon, signaling to her to keep her finger on the shutter. No, she yells. I don't want him in the shot. Something she never did before. I'm the photographer. You do what I tell you. Don't you ever do that again. She throws me the sarong. I come over to check the pics. Is he in there? No, not all of him. All of him would have taken away from me too much. Just that slice of the city coming into the frame, interrupting, is actually perfect. What it means to shoot in New York City, to intersect the present and the past. There's the mystery of it, too. It's done. I got it. I go back to the dressing room and put my shirt on. I go home. I look on the map. What was that building? The National Reserve Bank of New York? The place with the most gold any place in the world? I call my father up to tell him about the photo shoot. I know that place, he says, 6 floors down in the ground. Men with machine guns. They roll the gold right past you, and you better not reach out and touch none of it. He says real quietly, they saw you. They saw you all over that place. Damn, how close did I come to being involved in an incident? My thoughts of raising and pointing that musket in the air. How many cases of Black Americans blown away for holding fake guns or no guns? Clearly, they saw my unassuming shopping cart, the tripod and camera, just some harmless artist. If that had been a Monday morning and you tried that, you most likely would have been arrested. Everyone agreed. The irony of that building on the site of a slave rebellion, though. Africans epitomized the fight for freedom and democracy in America before 1776. I go back to that night on April 6, 1712. 23 enslaved Africans rose up in a quest for their freedom, armed with guns, axes, knives at an orchard on Maiden Lane. They set fire to a shed at the home of Peter Van Tilburg. They killed 9 white slave owners before they were stopped by the militia. Once captured after running into a swamp at present-day Canal Street. Accounts say up to 70 Africans were captured. 6 committed suicide. 40 were brought to trial and burned to death. Another was put in chains and starved to death. A pregnant woman was kept alive until she gave birth and was then executed. And the others were hanged. As a consequence, the harshest slave codes were enacted, but it wouldn't stop another from occurring in 1741. Thank you. So I'd like to bring up Pamela Sneed, Jessica Lanay, and Seph Rodney.
Good evening, everyone. How's everyone feeling? I have some questions for these brilliant writers and brilliant artists here. So my first question is for you, Nona. What was your experience like putting the book together? Usually photography in the world comes in different series and arrangements and different curatorial impulses kind of take an effect on the work. But you have a lot of control over the publication itself. So it's a different kind of vulnerability because it's all the work together. And also, how did you choose us to come into the catalog? What about our writerly voices made you invite us into your project?
Well, to begin with, I have been thinking about making a book of these images for quite a while. And, it was just something I always thought about, who would I want to contribute? And, Pamela, after I met her one night she came to an opening of mine on Staten Island, and we hit it off, and she gave me a book of hers, King Kong, and I read it. And I was like, I loved her and her work because we have this thing of pop culture. Like, we must have grown up like watching a lot of TV, movies, Vogue, fashion. I could just sense that in her writing, right? So there was that. And then, so she was just so dynamic. She was number one on the list. And then my dear Maurice Berger, who passed a couple of years ago at the beginning of the pandemic, he was like also on that list. And Seph Rodney, definitely, like, I mean, you know, he was one of some of the first critics to write about the work. And it was just natural, you know, that I picked him. And then when I met you, like, I was just so impressed by you being so young but so knowledgeable. Like, you knew things about me that I didn't even know was out there, you know? And I was like, oh, you know, and I thought it was important to have someone from the academic world, scholar, historians, but someone young, you know, who could set the tone and, you know, I could like bring into the forefront, you know, not that you needed that, but just, you know, so making the book, it was like just, it was so easy, you know? I mean, I don't know if I had no experience to base it on, except that once, you know, my former instructor, Justine Curlin, who's here tonight. Are you here tonight, Justine?
Yay!
She's the one who, along with Kim Boris and Higher Pictures, she contacted me and she sent me a text. And so she said, I found someone. And I hadn't even put that out there to her, but I used to just say it to people. So I want to make a book. And so when she came to me and told me about Mac Books, that she had introduced them to my work, and that Michael Mack was, you know, so impressed and wanted to make a book, and then I had all the images, most of the images together, and there was about, you know, I wanted to round it out. You know, I hadn't hit all the 5 boroughs, but I knew the sites I wanted to go to. So he gave me the time to finish that. I did, and I gave him the sequence. I told him the people that I wanted to write something, you know, for the book, and all of you were contacted, and then boom, it just laid it out, and it was done. The only part was the cover, you know, and even that was just a little hiccup, and then, you know, the designer, Morgan, just hit it. It just all flowed like it was meant to be, you know?
It definitely was meant to be. Continuing on the vein of pop culture and vulnerability, Seph, in your essay, you make a very interesting, surprising, and engaging comparison to Nona's nude photography to Irene Adler in the British Broadcasting Corporation's version of Sherlock Holmes. And there's this moment you describe where Irene Adler disrobes when Sherlock Holmes is coming to investigate her, and when he gets there, he has no idea what to do because he can't read anything off of her nudity. He's so shocked. But that also read to me as an act of vulnerability. And sometimes we underestimate how powerful vulnerability can be in interfering in violence or interfering in perspectives that are inaccurate about one's own being and self. So could you talk a little bit more about that comparison and the power of the naked power suit and how vulnerability is a part of that?
So part of the reason that I titled the essay "The Naked Power Suit" is that I think that's the term that Irene Adler uses. She talks about there's a moment in the show where she's sort of wondering out loud, what should I wear? Because I need to thwart this person, right? He's a threat. And she decides that she's going to wear her power suit. And that's the way she talks about it. And it came to me that in thinking about Nona's work that, yes, you're absolutely right in identifying that there is an aspect of vulnerability, but there's, you know, vulnerability indeed can be a kind of power, because what you are doing, I think, let me be clear, what Nona's doing in these moments when she's publicly exposing herself, right? Like she's publicly putting herself on display. She's allowing herself to be seen in a way that we typically don't, right? Like it's like, you know, I kept thinking when we talk about this tonight that there would be this interesting moment when I would think, oh yeah, what would it be like to be naked right here, right now, at this moment? Like, it actually
It's never
makes me
too late,
think.
Seph. It's never too late.
Working.
It makes me think that there's a way in which performance art really kind of brings all these sort of issues together, because I had a conversation with Kamau Bell a few years ago, and he said all you have to do in order to create performance art is you have to be present and transgressive. Nona's present and transgressive. And that is a kind of vulnerability, clearly, because you don't know what will happen. In fact, I want to read something, because I've thought about this poem a lot with your work, Nona. I may have mentioned it in a review I've written. I don't remember it. I'm trying to get my phone out of my jacket, is what I'm doing. I don't remember it offhand, but it's a poem by Lucille Clifton, and I think it's called "If I Stand in My Window." I figure you all would be familiar with this, but you all out here may not be, so please allow me. If I stand in my window, naked in my own house, and press my breasts against a window pane like blackbirds pushing against glass, because I am somebody in a new thing. And if the man come to stop me in my own house, naked in my own window, saying I have offended him, I have offended his gods. Let him watch my black body push against my own glass. Let him discover self. Let him run naked through the streets, crying, praying in tongues. So there is that, like, in this work, I see that performativity, I see that vulnerability, I see that power, and I see that transgression, and all of these things had made the work for me uniquely resonant.
And Pamela, you write in your poem essay, your hybrid work in the monograph, I understand that part of artistry where one becomes also a shaman, medium, and vessel. And that's in response to you viscerally feeling Nona's work. How does your writing process help you access the same historic, intimately personal, and like social spark points?
Okay, that's a little hard. All right. Well, okay. I've written about slavery for a really long time. You know, like that's the first book that I wrote was called Imagine Being More Afraid of Freedom Than Slavery. And I was like, 27 years old, right? And so in that regard, I kind of know the magic that one starts to access and the spirituality and all of that when you start to do ancestral work, right? And I think certain people are called to do it, or, it was interesting, I teach at Columbia, and I was talking to a student, and he said, well, I want to, and he's a black student, and he said that he wanted to go around to different sites, and that's to start collecting the water that, that black people were bathed in, walked in, and all that. And I was like, talk to shamans, talk to, and he was like, oh my God, right? And, but I was happy that I was there because I understood not only the intellectual pursuit, but also the spiritual pursuit. You know what I mean? Like it's not an ordinary quest, right?
It's a calling.
Yeah, it's a call. And so in that regard, that's my relationship to Nona's work. I think it was an article in Hyperallergic, like years ago. I think it was like the first one. And she was standing, I think that first photograph that you showed, when you're on Black Wall Street, was it there?
Oh, on
Wall Street.
On the box,
Yeah. I think that was the first one that I ever saw, and I was like, oh my God, this woman is amazing. You know what I mean? It was just, and it was time, that it felt like, so it wasn't just something that I like intellectually looked at and thought, oh, that's great. I felt it in my bones. I mean, I used to take my students to the African burial ground, right? And, people didn't even know, that the African burial ground exists, right? And it could be like really kind of corny, but it's actually brilliant, right? And steps away from the 9/11 museum, right? And so the interesting thing is that no one knows about the African burial, or very few know, But I used to take my students, and I would take, black women, white people, but it was interesting, like some of the black women that I took would get the spirit. They started talking in tongues, and like, they're like, oh my God, It's like, and so again, and they were like, Professor, thank you for taking us here, So I have to say that, like, doing that work, because I've done that work for a long time, it was like an immediate kind of like identification with Nona, I mean, I remember like, I was like, oh my God, I want to help sell it. I want to, I was like doing things that I don't even, do. Yeah, I thought it was brilliant. And I'm glad that the times are kind of catching up now, and they're starting to tell our stories, right? Like, even a couple of, 10 years ago, I was in grad school, I did my MFA, and it was a white woman who worked on Broadway, and she was like, and I was talking about slavery, and she was like, that story's never been told, And I was like, this is a white woman saying that, right? And so it's been a really, like, incredibly suppressed history, right? And so finally, like, the moments are coming that we can begin to discuss it. And so that, like, it feels like Nona is just, like, right on time to be that living embodiment, right? And so because I listen to that spirit, I don't know if I'm, like, a religious person or something like that, but I've always gotten hooked up with ancestral work, right? And so seeing that, and then also seeing the contemporary, because there's an interesting thing that Nona sort of like reinvents, right? So it's kind of like, she's back in Central Park, Seneca Village, and she's reading a book, right? And that was the thing that we were forbidden to do, right? But here's, Nona sitting with a big hat in Seneca Village, reading a book, right, and having tea, right? Oh, this one. And so it's this incredible act of reclaiming, right? This is not what we were allowed to do. So here is like a contemporary person who's back in there saying, here, I am a black woman and I'm sitting on this lawn, you know what I mean? And so there's a brilliance, and there's also this play, to your point, Seph, about visibility and invisibility, and I always play with that because we've been, all these slave women, all the slave history has been rendered invisible, right? And so here comes Nona, and she physicalizes that spirit, right? So so in a way, we've been made invisible, and then she's rendering us visible. She's rendering the black woman visible. So there is that interplay between the vulnerable and also the affront, like, okay, you tried to, kill me, you tried to, erase me, you tried to rape me and destroy me, and here I am in my power, in 2022, standing at a former slave site. And then the other thing is that we've survived. It's this incredible act of survival that generations now, that we came through one of the most heinous crimes, in history, and basically, have lived to tell and to embody it.
Thank God.
All right. Hallelujah.
Actually, I just wanted to say that there's something about that visibility thing I wanted to pursue, which is there's a way in which known as hyper-visible, which I think is kind of key to her work. And hyper-visible, but outside of a particular framework. So the framework in which we typically see black women hyper-visible in the culture is when they're entertaining us, right? When they're singing, when they're dancing. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but you're doing something which kind of carves out a space outside of this sort of profiteering from the entertainment industry, which I think is really key. It's like there's you're asking us to do different work as readers, right? Because we're really, really good at being passive listeners and taking in people who look like you, right? Who perform. Like, we're really good at that. But we're not so good at seeing a woman use her body in the way that you do to do something else, to point in some other direction, back to her ancestors, back to these once repressed histories.
And that hypervisibility invites in other historic figures as well, right? In all of our essays, we mention Harriet Tubman, we mention Sarah Bartman or the Venus Hottentot, we mention Fannie Lou Hamer, we mention Sojourner Truth. And so there's a way that the narrative of all of your photos together invites in those names that we know and even those names that we don't know. And so I wanted everyone to just kind of touch upon like what their personal experience was of writing those names down in their essays in relation to Nona's work.
Well, I think like conjuring up Sarah Bartman, writing about her, seeing Nona, in Sarah Bartman's, presence and all of that. I think, it's poignant, it's difficult. I mean, she was like, kept her remains, like her vagina was like in a bottle and formaldehyde on view in Paris for like 200 years, right?
Museum of Man.
Right, and it was Nelson Mandela, which I think is like a really powerful thing. Like Nelson Mandela said, the first thing that he did when he went into office was say, I want all of her remains, taken, off display, and I want them to be shipped home, right? And so it was like an incredible act of like restitution and dignity and, and to like give this person a resting place. So I mean, it's an incredible history to write about always. And again, it feels like call, and then also thinking about like Nona would, when she has the gun, and it's like Harriet always had that gun. She had that pistol, you know what I'm saying? And so there's that vulnerability, but there's also that like, there's the gangster, you know what I mean? Like I will, you up. You're like, you know what I'm saying? You get on this
Harriet
train.
Tubman would shoot you if you told her you wanted to go back.
Right.
That's
And
right.
yeah, there was none of that. And so, I don't know, I feel emotional, but I feel powerful. It's an act of like reclaiming. One of the things that I said in the essay was that we're also witnessing for the first time in my life that seeing like Black women publicly say no. No, my mental health means something. No, I'm not gonna do this. What is it, Naomi Osaka, and then who else was it?
Simone Black.
Yeah, like a whole bunch of people, and like we've never been allowed to do that, And so that's powerful to me, and so I feel like in this lineage of women who now get to say no, I feel that I've like led the way, but I'm also still learning, and I feel that, Nona's book is a testament to that, So.
And people get mad when Black women say no.
Absolutely,
I mean,
absolutely.
It's Simone Biles,
Right,
and
right.
Naomi Osaka. I mean,
Right.
they took a lot of heat, right? But also when you take a stand,
Right.
people, how dare you, And like, but going back to your question, this one, 74 Canal, where Sojourner Truth is, I was doing some research through this series, and it was just shocking that I found her address when she lived in New York City. And that Chinatown was a Black community, was an African-American community. And so just that knowledge, like that she lived in New York. I mean, all these things I never was taught in school, you know, and that John Brown, also the great, you know, abolitionist and warrior, you know, also when he was killed, they brought him to that neighborhood. And then it all made sense, you know, why they brought him to that neighborhood. To be, once his body was recovered. And I had the address, I'm still, but that whole neighborhood, you know, and just finding out and retracing, like, Harriet Tubman, all the work that's been being done to find out where she lived and the routes that she took and her family's home in Maryland. I mean, just things that are so, their life story is so valuable to us, you know? So,
And it's
yeah.
still pioneering, you know, it's still pioneering, you know.
But I also think what you're doing, too, in doing that kind of work is you're establishing a genealogy. I mean, you talked about this, Pamela, that you can see yourself in a line of women, right, who have publicly learned to say no and publicly found their kin, their spiritual kin, in people like Sojourner Truth and Fannie Lou Hamer. I think that that's really key because there's a way in which we begin to suss out who we are in the world and the work that we can do by sort of pointing to that kind of ancestry. By saying, and you know, it's a similar thing to saying, realizing that one's father or one's mother was a writer or was a particularly good actor, and there are those sort of traits that show up in greater or lesser degree in your own life. Mm-hmm. If you can point to your spiritual kin and see those traits, you can begin to, in some ways, like make sense of yourself and make sense of your place in the world and give yourself a better understanding of the work that you think you're called to do.
Right.
I also wanted to talk about one thing that's like really significant in your work to me is always the way that like the light falls, you know, and that like the way that it. Oh, okay. Well, I have
That's
this
the light you
photograph,
talked
right?
about in
But
the
the
essay.
light, I always see the light as spirit, right?
Me too.
Like I
Always.
always, and I mean, it's just beautiful the way that it appears, and it reminds me of when I was at Cape Coast Castle in Ghana and at the slave fort, and just talking about how that felt and everything. And then I was reading online, somebody said that when they left, that there was a certain kind of light that had fallen on the castle, you know, and that they knew it was ancestral. And I feel like every single time I look at your photographs, I see like this particular light playing in a certain way. I mean, it was in your mother's face, right? Like the show that was at Higher Pictures, right, with
Yeah,
Kim?
might have come
Yeah,
through.
and it's just like the way that you capture this light, or that this light kind of plays in. I just feel like it's an interplay with a certain kind of like spirit, ancestry. Something's going on,
Well,
but it's beautiful and it's golden and it illuminates everything.
Thank you. I think that happened before I was even a photographer, before I used to take pictures. I used to see the light. You know, I always like, ooh, you know, shadows and lights. And my dad, as you know, was an amateur photographer, took all the family images. And I would ask him, you know, take me out, show me how to take pictures with your camera. And, you know, he had a Nikon F, precious Nikon F, that he would not hardly let me take. I mean, he took me out, he set it up, and then he said, okay, you could press the shutter. And then he just let me press the shutter. But I wanted to get my hands on the camera because I was always seeing, you know, paying attention to the light and shadows. And so once that took off, once I started, you know, in undergrad, well, I used to like sneak his camera after that. I started sneaking it. But really, once I got in school, in undergrad, and started photographing exclusively in black and white, that's where I really played with that and really saw that and wanted to capture a lot of that. And even when I made the transition to color photography, I continued to put that in the work and see that. And then someone called it. I didn't even really know I was doing it really until one of my classmates said, "You see light," you know. And then I was like,
Yeah, like look at it in the window there. There's this gold light that kind of, you know what I mean? It's just like it's a whole other presence that's there.
and so
Yeah.
I just started using that and paying attention to that because I don't like to use flash. And of course, natural light, it's just natural to my soul. And I always shoot natural light, I always look for that. You know, where's the light coming from? What does that mean? But also when I'm out in the field, I'm looking for signals, you know, especially in the series. I'm always looking for signals in the land, telling me where I should go, what's here, something important happened here, something, you know, just feeling that energy of a place that was once inhabited by my people. And Harriet Tubman speaks to that, and in one of the images, I used her whole quote for that because she tells you, let me see if I can find it. It's a long quote, but here it is. "There are few markers left, but your black body is a marker. The land does hold the memory of your existence. You only have to put it there in its natural state to remember." Harriet Tubman. And so I just like always am paying attention to the land and the natural environment. What's that telling me? And the light is part of it.
I also, can I just throw out one more name, and Margaret Garner, you know, and just
yes.
like, yeah, and just thinking about like with you with the pistol, and then thinking about Toni Morrison is definitely all through this work, right? But so thinking about Margaret Garner, you know, like ready to kill her kids rather than have them go back into slavery, but this idea of you standing there with the pistol, with the arm, and it could be, you know, Margaret Garner made flesh, right? A monument to, you know, Margaret Garner. So, anyway.
I have a question about poetry. Poet, you've read poetry, and in our interview in the book, you talk a lot about the influence that historic information had on you, but also fiction as well as poetry. And throughout the book, we've had conversations about how the photos are organized. One of the questions that didn't make it in was, well, how did you organize them? But in the edit, the question came out. And so I'm thinking about Black narratives and art and how we often can't rely on prose because prose is also connected to structures of history, and so much has been buried. And even though so much is coming to light, usually what it reveals to us as Black people is that there's so much more digging to do, or there's a new perspective that needs to be given of certain other people who we're writing about, people who are in our spiritual family, as Seph said. So I want everyone to kind of talk about like poetry in this process. Because I know for me, I was reading a lot of Jane Cortez, June Jordan. I was like going back to Toy Derricotte, you know, who's a co-founder of Cave Canem, and I was really just going back to those poems that in what's happening in them, there's this simplicity of action, but what they're feeling is that tension of potential disappearance. So that's what poetry meant to me as I was getting ready to write for the book. What about the two of you?
Well, one thing I want to say about the sort of history of U.S. American poetry is that there was a moment in the 60s and 70s where you have women such as Lucille Clifton, Sonia Sanchez, really bringing a kind of robust, powerful Black femininity to the conversation around contemporary poetry. And so for me, when I first sing, I'm actually, you don't know this, Jessica, I don't know if you know this either, Nona or Pamela, but I'm a lapsed poet. I actually used to write years and years and years ago, back in my early 20s, and then I'm also a lapsed photographer. So all of these things sort of hugely resonate with me. But with regard to poetry specifically, I think that one of the things that happens to me, because I did read a lot of poetry and used to write, is that and it's happened less and so I'll be at Hyperallergic 7 years in May. It happens less and less now, but when I first started writing, it used to happen more, that I would walk into an exhibition and I would see the work, and immediately it would bring up a poem, and I would recall something. And that happened with your work. So I think, I don't know if I wrote about it, but I know that that Lucille Clifton poem I read came to me when I saw your work.
Well, it's funny that you cite her because she is one of the female writers that I had read, and I had never heard of her. And I don't know, I think how I discovered her is maybe when she died, because I think she died recently. And I must have read an article, and then I was like, it's when you read her work, she just grabs you. She has this incredible presence on the page. And I was like, I have to get everything she wrote. And I got like at least 5 of her books. And I was trying to read, everything. I don't think I finished it. But yeah, so that was funny when I read that in the review that you cited her. And I was like, yeah.
Same page.
Yeah.
I mean, it's hard for me to like really kind of suss out what poetry means because I live and breathe poetry. I mean, that's the way I see the world. You know what I mean? So, and I think of Nona's work as poetry, right? I think that there's a real relationship between visual art and poetry in that they both rely on the image. They both rely on description, on that visceral image. And so that's the relationship. I'm always talking to Nona about writing,
Yeah, she says, you're a writer. I'm like, no, I'm not.
Yeah. So
You're
yeah.
absolutely a writer.
Huh? Yeah, she's a writer. She's coming to it. But anyway, yeah, so it's hard to think about just, I don't know, I teach poetry is not a luxury. I talk about that every day by Audre Lorde, Poetry is not a luxury. It's the essence of our beings, It's the way that we understand the world. It's the way that we survive. It's the way that we name things. So I look at everything through that lens.
And I was reading, at the beginning of the series, I was reading a book of poems by female poets and writers about Venus Hottentot. And I used to walk around with that book. I was in grad school, and I used to come into the classroom, and one of my teachers, David Deacher, he noticed it like more at the end. He was like, every time you come into the classroom, you have that book with you. And I was like, oh, really? I'm kind of a blonde sometimes, I don't even pay attention. I don't even pay attention to some things that I'm doing sometimes, but then later on I do get it, like, oh, that's why I was doing that, or somebody will say something, and so, yeah, that book was with me like the whole first year of grad school. And, because I was a mom and doing like this rigorous, grad school program, it took me that like a whole semester to get through the book, So when I have free time on the subway or in class, I would be reading it, But yeah.
I do want to say one more thing about the relationship between poetry and visual art that I think is really key. And I've said this before in criticism that I've written or talks that I've given. Poetry is really a good lever for opening up visual art because poetry is the language of attention. You will not find a human being on the planet who is paying more attention to the thing they are writing about than a poet. Like the very intricate, fugitive, clandestine details of a thing, like why it exists and how it has come to be, poets talk about that. And so poetry is like, for me, it's just a natural fit with art criticism.
And with photography.
Right, it's about looking, right? It's about a really careful and close looking. Yeah.
There's a photo that we all wrote about. I'm wondering if we can see it so we can all have an opportunity to talk about it. It's the photo of you standing in the woods with the pistol, and it looks like you've just shot it, but it's actually snow laying in the crevice of the tree, and it looks like smoke.
It's called Lobbying the Gods for a Miracle.
Lobbying the Gods for a Miracle.
Yeah. And that's part of the Lefferts House series.
Right.
Well, the series within a series. Yeah, right here.
There it is.
Yeah.
There it is.
Thank you.
What was it about this photo? For me, what caught my attention was I was really just trying to figure out if you had fired that gun. Because I was like, it's cold, so that means the smoke is going to be more compressed as it comes out of the gun. But then I realized that it's the snow kind of laying in the broken part of the tree. And for me, there was just such an immediacy here, and there's like a braiding of time. And it's a very conspicuous braiding of time. And that became what I wrote about in my essay, I Cried Power.
Right.
Because what the poetry I was thinking about when I wrote it was Nina Simone.
Right.
And that I ran. So I run to the rock, please hide me. I run to the rock, please hide me. And the rock said, I ain't gonna hide you, child. Lord, I ain't gonna hide you. And I thought about that song in particular because I thought about it in a contemporary context. When Black women and femmes are running, there are so many ways that we cannot be held or hid or helped because it puts the people who would in danger as well, right? But even from that conundrum, we still find, even though we shouldn't, like Taraji P. Henson says, we shouldn't have to be strong. We shouldn't have to find power, but we do. And so that's what made me start with that photo, because it just brought so much music and noise to me. And you're literally looking like, which way do I go? You're so in that moment. So that's what brought me to the photograph. You also wrote about the photograph, and so did you.
Well, I just want to talk about like that belt of baby shoes, you know, and what that could possibly mean or be. So that's like powerful too, you know, like the baby, you know, the children's white shoes. You know what I'm saying? I mean, there's so many layers to that and so much interpretation.
I mean, when I created that image, you know, it's like a triptych around the Lefferts House. That's Prospect Park. And that specifically is near the boathouse. And we went there, you know, I specifically had that image in mind, that idea in mind. Henry Louis Gates did a series on slavery. And I don't know whether it's from his series or where I heard, but they said that in places in the woods, in particularly the South, you could still hear women crying for their children that were stolen. Like, that's how much the land absorbed their cries and sorrows of them being torn apart from their children. That if you're quiet at a certain point and a certain place in time in these woods, you can still hear their cries. And when I was doing research on the Lefferts House, what stood out to me was some of their enslaved women, some of the names of their enslaved on a list. And that also, they said, like at Christmas and New Year's was the most horrible time to be a slave person, because your children would be sold off, or you would be sold from your children, given as gifts and presents. And so I wanted to speak an image that spoke to that, a woman who had decided to leave, to flee, as many women did. Harriet Tubman, she brought women with children with her on those escape routes. And so I wanted an image that spoke to that, a woman who decides to flee, a woman who has children, you know. And yeah, and so that's how, but the day we went to shoot this image, it had just snowed, and I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I wanted to go in that area because a lot of history has transpired in Prospect Park. That's a Revolutionary War site. There's still remains of Revolutionary soldiers in Prospect Park. And so also the idea of we were there, you know, and feeling that history was important to place us there, for me to be there. And so I just found that tree. And just thinking about, you know, when people fled, they would use all all of the land to hide in, to rest in, a log, a rotten tree, or, a cave, or just any place to rest for a while. And so that's how I came upon that. And I saw that tree, and I was like, and then we started working around it. Yeah.
Seph,
Yes?
why did you choose to write about this photo?
Oh, I think because I've written about this idea before that there's a way in which the gun figures really prominently in American stories of, well, essentially in a kind of white settler heroicism, right? There's like, it's the power of and in fact, we talked about it on a podcast not too long ago. One of the things we concluded in that conversation was that there's a way in which certain kind of men feel, and women, feel that the gun makes them immortal. That they hold on to that power of the gun. They're very, very afraid of any sort of legal or judicial sort of intervention between what they think of as their rights to defend themselves and other people's rights to be safe in public, because they feel like they will never die if they have the gun in their hand. And what I think intrigued me about this image was that idea is being turned on its head, because it feels to me like this hero, the hero that is in this image, is not about like this sort of chest beating, no one's gonna trample on my freedom kind of person. She's looking to lead, to rescue other people. She's looking to find someone else to take with her. So there's a different kind of heroicism that's being modeled here, and that was really intriguing to me.
And also, what does it mean when a Black woman specifically has a gun?
Yes.
You know,
Exactly.
you don't see that.
We don't often see that. That is true. Well, we're also ready for questions from you all. So there are microphones to the right and left of you. And if you will regale us with your comments or your questions, we would be happy to answer them.
Okay. Don't be shy.
Don't be shy. Well, I'll be selfish. One of my favorite images that I didn't get an opportunity
We'll let you think a minute.
that I didn't get an opportunity to write about is she gave them everything and still they asked for more.
Yeah.
That
Oh, okay. Let me see if I can get to it.
Thank you so much for your talk. I can't get away from the idea of the crevices in the land and the way in which the land is so active in all of your photographs. And I really want to hear more about how the land acts, or how you see the land acting in the shelter, in the crevices of travel, but also historically, how that land has been used.
Yeah, that's a really good question. You know, I love landscapes. I love landscape painting. I love landscape photography. And this series was my way of bringing that into portraiture. And the land is really all we have after, you know, everything has been erased, you know? The history of African Americans have been so tampered with and erased. And so, you know, it was, like I said, that quote of Harriet Tubman that guided me. You're looking for markers, you're looking for structures, you're looking for, you know, places of where we lived, but because we're constantly being uprooted and pushed out off the land, off communities, highways being erected right through African American communities and disrupting decades of being, you know, building community. But the land still holds the memory of us. And so it's my way of putting us back there, saying, we were here, and after, part of me in putting this series together was that one day I won't be here, and my community won't be here, and they'll be looking for us, and hopefully these pictures will tell you we were here.
And just to also continue just thinking about the landscape, right? When we think about our contemporary life and how it looks materially, the things we buy, the things we own, the buildings we go to, what streets are named and where streets are laid, what we often miss is that all of it, right, for some certain people more than others, is a product of rampant dispossession and murder of Indigenous and Native American peoples from Canada all the way down to Patagonia, right, in Argentina. And the bodies that were used to dispossess that land via cash crop interrupting Indigenous cultivation were Black individuals who were taken and sold away from their home. And so from the Louvre, from the Museum d'Orsay, the rebuilding of Paris in the mid to late 19th century, that all came from the disruption of the world via the transatlantic slavery. Modern banks contemporary banks we know of, insurance companies began so they could insure land taken from Native American Indigenous bodies and ensure Black individuals being forcibly shipped from their homes into this new reality. And so we take it for granted, but almost every single thing that we understand about modernity can be traced back to that massive wealth that was accrued there.
Yeah. And one other thing also what triggered, I knew that, like I said, the basics of what I wanted to do. And when you're talking about these sites, that's it. But I was on the train one day and I struck up a conversation with this woman, and she even understood. She was, of course she was a white woman, and she understood clearly. And she said, the land is crying out. She said, there's so much blood in the land. The land is crying out. And I was like, there you go. And so I knew I was like on that right path, and what I was discussing and wanted to show. We have a
Oshana?
question.
Hey, good evening, everybody. So I just want to say thank you, but also two things. A Litany for Survival by Audre Lorde definitely
Absolutely.
spoke. And also I'm seeing, it's interesting that I see you in these pieces as Elegba. And so we're confronting Elegba, we have to, because that confrontation then is becoming our way to communicate with what we're seeing on the page, but also with the story, with those ancestors in the archives, with the stories, with the research. And so you then have become Elegba in this photograph, and stripped away all the other things, and for me, you essentialized who Elegba is, because in the confrontation and in that's communicating, if this is a word. I'm a dancer, I can't.
And for our audience, just context, Baba Legba Eshu Elegwa is a guardian or god of the crossroads that has origins primarily in Yoruban culture, which is from southwestern Nigeria. And he was one of the original kind of spirits, gods, ancestors that came down to guard the crossroads in all transitions. And so he rules reality, and nothing gets done in ceremony or at all until you call him and he opens the door for all the other ancestors, spirits, and gods to come through to have a communication with the individual or community that's calling upon them. So you're creating doorways in your work, and like this work especially. For me, this just stands out from the rest of the series so richly because it's I can't even. My whole body's responding, but I just can't find the words.
Well,
This-
also, sorry, just a portal.
A portal.
Right.
This one was in tribute to my great-grandmother, Martha, who my mom had told me so much alike. She died when my mom was a little girl, but she made such an impression on her. And that is a Dan mask that I bought from the Brooklyn Museum's gift shop when I used to work here. And I use everything that I have around me just, as I respond to something, I bring it, and so that's how, and that's in the Botanical Garden across the street. Does it have another question?
Yeah, I have a question. I'm sorry if it might be obvious, but I'm just wondering, what is the meaning of the white shoes?
Amazing question. Thank you.
Every time I do a talk or go anywhere, someone asks me that question, and I started telling people what it means, but then I started saying, well, what do you think it means? And a few times that I did, people gave me their answers, and they were pretty much correct.
I'll take a wild guess.
Yeah.
I had something to say about the white shoes, so if I could jump in for a second, because I've looked at the book a lot of times, and of course I'm obsessed with the white shoes, but the photograph with the baby shoes, it was the first time tonight that I realized that those are also white shoes. So that's what I want to say. And then I was also interested in your white boots that you're wearing tonight, and they're fabulous.
But go ahead, give me your answer to what you think the white shoes is.
Well, I wonder, is it kind of playing into the quote-unquote traditional idea of whiteness as purity, kind of juxtaposed with this idea of darkness as not pure?
I like that. I like that. I like that. I thought everybody here knows what the white shoes is, huh? I think I've said it so much. So the white shoes, specifically when I conceived of the idea, I needed something that spoke about the effects of whiteness on the black body, of Western beauty ideals on black female body, or things just what we could not get away from in our life, and just all around the world, the effects of that oppression on the black body. And so, but also I saw the white shoes as proper lady shoes, when I first saw them in the window in Payless.
Payless indeed.
I was like, ooh, those are shoes like church shoes, like you used to wear, we used to wear for Easter, and in the black church, black women wear, all white, the sisters that wear all white, they're the
ushers,
elders,
yes.
the ushers, and that's the thing that, constantly growing up, was being a proper lady, keep your legs closed, and so all those things came rushing back. And then I was like, oh, those are the shoes like you would see Queen Elizabeth wear, and I just was like, yes, that's the symbol of the West, in many ways, and that effect on us as black women, all of that. And so, but, I was reading Fanon, and Black Looks, White Mask, and that also, once I saw them, they were the ultimate symbol to me.
It also reminds me of Deborah Willis's commentary in her book, The Black Female Figure, she writes about how when photography kind of became a more popular thing, oftentimes Black models would be invited in to highlight white women sitters, as if to make the suggestion that there's an innate quality of unattractiveness or undesirability in Black women that would enhance the beauty of white women in these photographs. And we see it, we see it from Manet and Impressionism when we think of Olympia, and we see the servant leaning in with the flowers to offer to the model herself, who's laying across a white sheet that's kind of blued, and then her skin is also white. And so when I look at those shoes, I also think of that commentary from Willis as well, and think about those juxtapositions that were at large as a way to enhance beauty in art history, like just plainly so.
And then there's layers to it that, you know, I still find new things that the white shoes reference. That when I was conceiving of it, you know, in the quickness and hurriness of creation, you know, you don't like fully think out, but after said and done, boom, you know, it all comes in, you know. Is there anyone else?
Last chance.
Last chance.
Last call for yes. Thank you.
Hi, I have a question. It's more technical, maybe. It's about locations. How did you choose locations? Like, it's on the one hand, you can take pictures everywhere, like in New York, but on the other hand, there are not so many places known for like people in the. And another question about the locations: did you ever get in trouble, or were like denied access because some of these places have gates around?
Through reading and research, I started researching the topic of African Americans in New York City history when I was in undergrad, a long time ago, many moons ago. And it was out of a frustration of, you know, all these people of color, all these Black people here, like, why aren't we in the curriculums? Where did we come from? Where did we live? You know, like, tell me the history. And so I started digging, and I did a research paper. And then after that, places would just jump out at me. You know, like I was reading Frederick Douglass' biography, and he places himself literally on the corner of L'Esplanade and Church. He says this, literally, when he first came to New York City, I'm standing on this corner of L'Esplanade and Church across from David Ruggles' house, the abolitionist. And I was like, you know, and so like that, when you start to read about a place and you read about the people who lived in that place, they begin to name streets, they name places. Even there were many incidents of riots and you know, all kinds of events that took place, and people name streets. And so that was how I would, and then sometimes I would just look for it, you know, I would just do the research, you know, and go to the archives and look it up online and just find it. And now there's so many people who are filling in the gaps, and we're all doing that. You know, there's filmmakers, but there's writers, poets that are all scholars, historians that are all trying to fill in the gaps and place us there and give you a more fuller history of African American contribution, Chinese contribution. I mean, my daughter is half Chinese, and they're in California, I mean, all over, in New York City, there's great contributions by so many people and groups, and they're being erased. So that's how I find. So did I ever have an incident or be arrested? No. I really try. I really believe that there was someone protecting me or something protecting me when I would go out in the streets. One day I was at the Tweed Courthouse going up the steps, that shot. It was 18 degrees that morning. And it's perfect for me. Because I was like, ain't nobody gonna be out there. You know, I prefer winter, but my bones don't love it anymore. But anyway, I was, you know, we got out, and I knew that was a high surveillance area. You know, police one, that's courthouse. So when we got out, and I set up the camera and everything, and I'm about to take my coat off to do the shot, and here come a police officer coming down the block. And I was like, oops. And I turned like that, and he never saw me. He just kept on going. And so, you know, that was the only time I got close. But I knew not to push it. Like, you know, I was like, look, they're probably looking at you right now and saying she's got 5 minutes before we come down there on her. I could feel that one. I could feel it. And so that's why I just hurried up and then said, let's go, we got it. And then I had to do another shot, so I went back, but there was one time, this is the one time that I almost got caught. It was at Supreme Court 60 Center Street. And as you know, there's a booth there on the side where the police officer is. So the first time we went there, it was like 5, 6 o'clock in the morning, and 2 officers was in front of the courthouse. I was like, will they leave? Will they won't leave? Okay, and Shannon was like, then as soon as you take off your coat, they're on you. So we had to leave that day. We came back with my neighbor, 2 classmates, and we did this thing where the 2 classmates who were South African was talking to the police officer in the booth, trying to distract him. You gotta get to that picture. Where is it? Go back to 60 Center Street, and you could almost see it in my face that where I see it. You wouldn't know what's going on, but I see it. It's in the beginning. And so they're distracting him. Yeah, they're distracting him while my neighbor is literally standing on the other side of that railing. So she's right in the line with me, so he can't see me. And then Shannon with the tripod is in the front. And so I never felt like I really got that, nailed it, you know? So I went back again. And this time we didn't need any to strike because I was a real veteran then, you know, and felt this sight. So I set up the tripod. She got here, you know, she got in front of the tripod or behind the tripod. I got in front of the camera. And so then I just took the coat off and threw it. And she hit the shutter when I told her to hit the shutter. And I could hear him go, like he's calling for the troops. I mean, I could hear, you know, and it's when your senses, when your eyes can't do the work, your hearing gets super intense, you know, it's true. I could hear him calling for everybody. And I said, and so then I calmly walked down the steps, picked up my coat, put it on, and a cab was coming right down Center Street, and I was like, dude, and I jumped in the cab, and it jumped in again, and we took off. And the cab driver was this young Chinese man, and I don't know how much he saw, but when I got in the cab, he turned around and he looked like what is going on? Yeah, what is going on? And so another time I was in a cab and I was going past there, maybe a few days later, they had the cop car on the sidewalk waiting for me. Like, let her come back. We're gonna get her. And I was like, not today.
Give it up one more time for Nona Faustine. And thank you so much to Jessica Lanay, Pamela Sneed, and Seph Rodney for joining us this evening. Please, we invite you to stick around, and if you have not purchased a copy of White Shoes, please support this important artist. You can do so up on the stage, and then if you stick around, Nona will also be signing and personalizing copies. By the way, I'm Lauren. I'm the Director of Public Programs for the museum, and I just want to thank all of you for coming out tonight. Thank you again for supporting such an incredible artist, and you've really had such a treat today to hear this behind the scenes of making the artwork. So please come back, discover more artists with us. Get home safe, everyone. Thank you.